for every year they've been in a curriculum, it's about a month to get out of that mindset. So if you've had your child for 6 years in a curriculum mindset, you need 6 months of back off.
Yeah.
Don't say, let's go, you love to cook, let's go watch cooking. Because they're going, nope, now at school, mom's involved, and she's going to ask me what I learned after I finish watching that
Well,
show.
see, and I find that mine will, like, if they go, oh, I love cooking, oh, why don't you make dinner this week? You pick the dinner and you pick the day. And then they're planned into it, and I'll be there nearby, but I don't get involved. So if they burn it, they own it. But you know.
And he does that. He loves to. You know what? He's got his scheduled times off. Can I make chicken muffins on Wednesday mornings?
Yeah.
He does that.
And that's.
You know, I hear you talking about, oh, before we get to this place, we're going to study it, and he doesn't like me doing any of that. Like,
That's so
hey, let's
true.
take a picture of this.
Can you guys
Awesome
describe what the word
plans,
strewing means? Because that might help some people.
I was
in here.
actually getting ready to mention
Yeah.
that, because that is something that you can do if you find something that you think your kids are going to be interested in, but you mention it to them, it's like, oh, you want me to do it? I'm not so sure about that. But if you just find it and just leave it laying around wherever they're going to be, to find and to pick up and to be able to just kind of research and see if they like it or not, on their own, not something I picked this out for you to do because I think you will like it. I found it, and you know, just leave it around and see if they pick it up. If they don't, maybe they weren't interested in it, you know. But they may be really interested in it. So that's something that you can do, because I think we all have that issue, whether we're homeschooling or unschooling. It's when you start suggesting things and the kids are like.
Well, and it's funny because we switched over 2 years ago to Life of Fred. And it was funny, when I bought the Life of Fred books, I, of course, my husband was like, buy the whole curriculum. So that's what we did. And I had like 3,000 books in my house when we had the Sticks and Bricks house. So the military moves were a lot of fun. They hated coming to my home. But Life of Fred, basically my kids will leave it for a month at a time, 2 months at a time, but then when they pick it up, they'll read the whole thing in a month and they'll do all the problems. And then they won't touch it for 3 or 4 months. And that's okay. We were learning that you know, you just leave that alone. But, you know, it's one of those things where, you know, you kind of just hands off it and they pick it up again later. Oh, that's the next book. Maybe I should look at it. And so they got interested in it because it's a story. And so you learn about Fred because Fred's 3 feet tall, but he's 36 inches. And so my 9-year-old loves the story, and he doesn't care much about the math involved, but he can do all the math in it because he's reading the story.
Did you have something, Tam?
Yeah, I was just going to say that I'm not doing this because my children are still a little bit. What you're saying and with the strewing, the reason I like those ideas is because to me a lot of it's personality.
Absolutely.
When I was younger, and even now, if I'm told to do something, I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to say, no, I don't want to do that because you told me to do it. So it could just be, if you're making the suggestion, it's just his personality to say, no, I want to do what I want to do. So if you leave it and let him do it on its own, then you're not telling him to do it.
The other thing, I have a 15-year-old who was in public school for 4 months in kindergarten. He had a really, really horrible experience, and still to this day, he struggles with suggestions. But when I know that he's interested in something, like let's say the cooking, he loves cooking, I will pull out cookbooks for myself because I want to learn and share it with him. So then I will tell him, you know, I found this really good brownie recipe that I wanted to try. I'd love your help if you want to help. Stuff like that. So the books are out and he can use them all he wants, but then he also has the resource in me wanting to do it, or if I'm looking up a class because I want to go to it, and I offer if he wants to come along. And then it's not me suggesting that he do something, but maybe that he wants to join me while I do something.
That was a really good question, by the way.
Yeah.
I think it's really important, and I think what everyone said, I mean, part of it could be personality, the age. I know I'm, with both of my kids, this super fun age, and mine's left now, so I can say at 12. Very interesting difference of age, but I think the strewing part, I know with my daughter it's the same thing. It's a lot of, like, it's just kind of there. When she was younger, it was a little bit easier, like when I was saying, like, oh, you like horses? Let's go horseback riding. Now it would be more like, you know, we're out somewhere and I noticed, like we were just in Pomona. We actually didn't do it, didn't go ahead, but I had found that there was a place with horses, and my plan was kind of just to kind of go there, and then if she kind of got an interest again, maybe we'd go back to horseback riding. A lot of it is just the presentation of it. If you
if you think a program might be good for him to watch, then you just go ahead and sit down and watch. Maybe he'll come in and out and hear bits of it and later on ask like, hey, you sounded like you were watching something that might be of interest, or I saw you reading something, but I was curious for those who are not unschooling yet, is there any other questions that we haven't gotten to that you want to address? We're at 2:30. I do see winds kind of picking up in case anyone needs to leave. Is there anything else questions you had?
So, I've heard a lot of talk for older children.
One sec, Nancy. Go ahead, Tammy. What?
I've heard a lot of talk about older children. My biggest concern, I guess, to be honest, it's my husband's biggest concern, and I like a little bit of it. So your kids are 5, 6, 7, they should be learning to read and do basic math and these kinds of things. If they just want to catch lizards all day, like my almost 6-year-old, and has no interest in reading, how do you kind of deal with like, okay, well, he's 7 or 8 and doesn't read, and he's not even interested?
Books on
Nancy,
CD?
No, I couldn't hear that.
I'm just gonna, Nancy, she was just saying, if having younger children, if they're, 5, 6, 7, and they're really just interested in kind of being out and about and doing things, lizards and playing outside, and they haven't yet shown an interest in reading, aren't reading, where, is that a concern?
Any kind of,
Yeah, should you do
I
anything,
have to
intervention,
encourage
curriculum, just let it go?
Right. How long do you just
My
let it go?
personal feeling on that is that kids, the best way of teaching kids to read is to read to them.
Yep.
And so we always had a bedtime story until my kids were in about 4th grade, and I was really, really sad to give it up, but they got to the point where they could read books on their own, and they preferred that rather than that nighttime routine. But all the way up until they were in about like age 10 or so, we had every single night read a bedtime story. That's going to be their best way of teaching a kid to read. And I think as long as kids are developing that love of story, so the idea of the love of words and a story and that whole idea, if they're getting that idea and they love to be read to, they're going to be picking up to learn to read. I would start getting concerned if I was reading to my kid regularly, since they were itty bitty. If they weren't reading by about age 8, I would be getting concerned personally. I know that there are other parents who would say, my kid can pick it up when they're 15. I would think that if I was providing that challenging and stimulating environment, I was reading to my child, I had a very word-rich environment for my child, and they weren't reading by age 8, I'd start to get worried and start looking into it. But I think that is a parental call that we all need to look at. As far as math, again, a lot of just understanding the number system. I think the best way, and this is what I did as a teacher, was I had a 100 number chart, and we just played games, and it was all about just learning to understand how numbers work, understanding our base 10 system. And once you understand the base 10 system and you understand how our numbers work, then you just don't have to, you can just jump into adding and subtracting, and it all makes sense. So the whole idea is understanding numbers and understanding how numbers work. And those are great things you can just play games with. There are so many games out there. Pick up a book on 100 number chart, and there's so many, hundreds of games. Do a search on games using a 100 number chart, and you can be playing games every single day that will help develop that number sense. And once your kid understands the number sense, then you're ready to go. So, but again, if you're doing all of that and they're not getting it, and they're probably age 8, around age 8 is when we start to see learning disabilities kick in. There's that big jump in, for most kids, there's a big jump from concrete to abstract at about age 8. And if your kid isn't making that jump, kind of an indication that there may be something else going on.
Okay, the input on that.
I understand that concern. Zoe started reading really early, around 3. Tegan didn't start to read until about 7 or 8. And first, I just want to point out that not all education is reading. There are also plenty of TV shows and discussions and activities and lots of things you can do without having to have your child read. So if your kid wants to chase lizards, talk about lizards. You get out a book and find out what kind of lizard is this, and that kind of encourages the book too. Where'd you find that? You know, to kind of give that encouragement. We did start getting a little concerned, and we told her this would be a good thing for you to do, but we still didn't really push hard. And at one point, it just started to click, and she got an interest and took off on it. And today, you couldn't tell any difference in her reading ability.
Really good.
Yeah, she wrote a book when she was 10, actually. So
It's for sale too.
And I know lots and lots of families, probably off the top of my head, a dozen with boys. I mean, the study showed across the board that general academic levels are based on girls, and boys are years behind. It is not unusual for a boy to not read or read fluently until 10 or 12.
I think it's the more
yeah.
physical kids, and that was Tegan. She wouldn't stay still.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mary
Because she
was
wanted
like
to
that.
spin and
so
jump
that
and
reading to
twirl.
them and reading to them and reading to them and giving them the opportunity to listen to books. And I have one of my best friends, had her son tested at 9, took him to a neurologist, totally stressed out, smart as a whip, smartest little kid I ever knew, had no interest in reading. She took him to a psychologist and a neurologist. In the neurologist's office, he sat for 20 minutes and talked to her son. And then he looked at the mom and said, "What are you worried about? This is the smartest 9-year-old I have ever met. He will read when he's ready to read. Leave him alone. Stop stressing out. Go play at the park." And he's 10 and 11 and is just now becoming a fluent reader, but he's reading like 8th, 9th grade level books. He skipped the first 6 grades.
And I'll say I'll say it after she leaves, I guess. My older daughter, who's 20 now, she read early as well when she was 3 or 4. And I did nothing different with her than my younger daughter, who really wasn't fluently reading till she was about 10. And it was a little nerve-wracking for a while because I was trying to understand, was I doing something different or wrong, or that's okay, you can come in, or was there an issue with the kids, because they were different, or but honestly, it was the same kind of thing. It just finally clicked. She just wasn't quite ready. We read to her all the time. She could, pick words. She identified logos. She could, do tons of stuff on the computer. And that's really, honestly, she taught herself to read. I give myself no credit at all for that. On it, I would kind of go, "Oh, I don't understand those computer games. I don't get it. Sorry, you got to figure it out for yourself." And she did. And now, although she maybe there's a little finessing on her writing or spelling or things like that, but honestly, she reads fine. Sometimes she picks apart her friends who write something, incorrectly or have some issues, but it was really when she wanted to learn to read and when she was old enough for it all to click, because she was in a book club, and I was telling someone that she got tired of me reading to her the book, and that was the only way she could participate in the book club, is if I did that. And she was like, "I don't want to be in the book club anymore because I can't read it for myself." And I gave her those options and resources where we could work more on this. You could take a class, all the different things we could do. She didn't want to. When she then got a little more motivated because she saw, whether it was, subtle peer pressure or whatever, or that the fact I wouldn't help her with every single video game or typing things she wanted to do. And now she reads fine. I don't know if it's grade level or not. I haven't tested her or anything like that. But I will say, when you think about it, although as parents sometimes we go, "Well, when did your kid learn to read?" Mm-hmm. Honestly, it doesn't matter. It's really an issue of whether they can read or not.
Right.
So no one later on, when you're, this CEO of a company is like, "Well, I can't believe you made it to CEO because you didn't read until you were 10. Did it matter if they read at 4 or at 10? Sometimes it matters to the child because they are frustrated. But honestly, in life, it really doesn't matter. And not everyone enjoys reading. I mean, I know my husband left too. I can talk about him. But, he just doesn't enjoy reading as much as I do. And so for some people, they learn it and it's just not their thing too. So I think, having the concern, is very real, understandable. And I think we probably all have that. That's why it does help to have a support system of people. And, when you see older children especially, you go, "Okay, it's all going to be okay. it's gonna work out. And if for some reason there is, you know, a learning disability that needs to be addressed, and you have a concern, there are resources for that to, you know, to go and talk to someone. If the reason why reading isn't happening is because there's dyslexia or something else, but it may just be they're not ready. They're just not ready. So back to anyone else, since it's anyone else who,
I just wanted to say
yeah.
something real quick. I think it's just important to just kind of inspire the love of learning just across the board, whether it's reading or whatever it is. And if your child is interested in lizards, then go with that and find all kinds of resources that they can kind of tie into to lizards or whatever they're into. And I think just and getting excited about that with them kind of inspires them to learn whatever it is that they want to learn at that point. And kind of looking outside the box of the traditional education and seeing that learning doesn't happen in a box, really. I mean, there's all kinds of resources out there that aren't going to happen right in that set curriculum or that traditional way of learning. And you really have to think outside of that box. So if your child's not reading yet, then you can kind of look at that and go, well, is that okay? You know, is that a problem? Are they making progress toward that? You know, because you can see the progress happening. If not, then pay attention to that. But I think it kind of takes just thinking outside of the traditional, we have to do things at this certain time to move forward. So.
Are there any last questions? And then I'm going to just see if the panelists have any last things they want to share. Nancy, is there anything else you'd like to, last words for today?
I think I would just like to reiterate what you had mentioned earlier about don't get caught up with the terminology or the name or whatever. Do what works for your family. I was actually told by one of the big name unschoolers that I wasn't a good unschooler because I allowed my boys to choose classes at school. She happens to be very anti-school. I feel that school can fit into the big picture just perfectly fine. And so she was like, oh, well, you're not a good unschooler because of that. So do what works for you and for your kids. We're all different. All of our kids are different. We all have different passions. We all have different interests. And it's all good as long as we are just kind of working toward what works for us and being open to all of the ideas and not feeling like we have to be tied down to some sort of a curriculum just because that's what society expects or that's what our family expects or whatever. We're good. So go with what works for you and make it work.
Great, thanks, Nancy. Christy, do you have anything last? I would just say if you're interested in unschooling, you have it within yourself to pursue it, and you feel really driven to do that, I would go for it and just find all the resources that you can, and just know that unschooling is more about just being in tune with what your family needs and your kids need, and like Diane was saying about not getting hung up on the label of unschooling, that it is more about just being responsive and just showing love and acceptance towards your children so that you can kind of work with them and live with them and learn with them. So I would just encourage you, if you're interested in it, to go for it.
Zoe, any words of advice?
Well, one of the best things that honestly anyone can do is to ask why, how, any question you can, and also to try to answer other people, even if that answer is, especially if that answer is, I don't know, let's find out. And honestly, that's the best that anyone can do, is to keep asking questions and keep trying to answer them, and just learn from whatever you can. You can use any resource, just keep asking and answering questions.
Right?
I think you've all done a good job, so except you didn't leave much for me. I think Zoe had a good point there that we're all still learning, and that to me has kind of been the inspiration for unschooling. Is I want my kids to start living life and finding out how to do things and accomplish their goals, and helping them along with that, and that that's what I did when they were first born, that's what I'll do when they're 50 years old, so that's what I'm doing now.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank you all for coming. In the middle of the table is some issues